when I grab his neck, I'm going for my guillotine. When I drop his head, he jumps to the freedom side. Now right here, as soon as he lands, he starts to lock his hands together, turns his chin. Okay. Now from here, don't throw your hips up in the air. You'll see people that will do that. Okay. If his hips go too high in the air, I pull guard, and then he's going to lose the advantage that he's got. So from here, I like to, I'm going to sprawl, but he's going to drive into me. Now he's going to go ear to ear, and then he's going to drive that shoulder down into my throat. Okay. If your hips go way up in the air, your pressure is probably about to get stolen. Okay, because the higher up your hips go, you're wide open underneath. I can pull guard, half guard, or potentially I can just dump you and try to roll you over. Okay. The other part we don't do is we don't roll. When I push that shoulder down, don't suddenly twist your body, because same thing. When you're driving it down here, you're making yourself rollable to that side. So the pressure itself, it's a crush of the shoulder down. It's not a body rock where we're literally turning onto our side to try to make the pressure. It's more like I'm just going in a super tight hug and then dropping that shoulder in the process. And that's called a von Flue. All right. So again, let's try it on both sides. One, it's a common defense. Okay. We jump to the freedom side. Okay. And if the person is silly enough to continue to try to hold on, which happens way more often than you think, again, lock your hands together. Once I put even a little bit of a squeeze, have your partner try to pull their hands out. It gets to the point where you are now stuck. And that's the reason why a lot of people get choked unconscious from von Flues. It's because their hands literally get pinned. They can't let go. They can't even pull their hands out. And then they forget to tap. All right, let's give it a shot. 1, 2, 3. Take a hold of your neck. We already messed up phase 1. Okay? So they already got your neck. That's already happening. So the next part is stopping the connection of the hips. Okay? And that's the reason why a lot of people attempt to pull guard, things of that nature. Once the hips can connect, then when they put pressure on your neck, you can't just get rid of it. So one of the ways that we look at the pressure is if I'm holding onto his neck, if his hips and his head are on the same side, pressures tend to be at their maximum. And whenever he can move his hips to the opposite side, so the head and the hips are opposite of each other, the pressures are at their minimal. Doesn't mean it couldn't choke him. Okay? I've seen some people that are just beasts with their squeeze. And again, at that point in time, you're probably tapping more to a neck crank and not to an actual choke. And so then the question simply becomes, with that kind of squeeze, could you have beaten an individual the same size as you with that squeeze, or did you only beat them because they're smaller than you in that instance? And once we can make that cross body, I'm going to argue that you could not beat somebody your own size and your own strength with that kind of squeeze. You probably were only beating them because there was a size difference and a strength difference between the two of you. But again, the litmus test of jiu-jitsu, just because you can tap somebody does not mean you did it right, and it doesn't mean it's a great technique. It just means it worked against them. The real litmus test is when you start pulling it off against people bigger, badder, and stronger than you, and who are also a little bit technically savvy, to your level as well. That's the litmus test. When you can start to do it against multiple body types, I mean, I hate to say it, but literally, you can take my entire kids class and put them after me all at the same time, and there's not a single legit win. None of them are going to touch me. I could beat all of them at the same time. Okay, but there's not a single legit win in there because I can just overpower them. So there's no technique required. Okay, so when I've got Matt through here, if he stays on this side, choke's going to be at its strongest. Okay, but now also think about if he's doing a head-arm triangle on me, it's the same thing. If he starts cross body here, okay, what are the chances of him choking me from here? Okay, I'm going to say slim to none. His hips are on this side. His head is on this side. This is at the weakest pressure he's going to get. But when he starts to crawl, stronger, and now it's at its strongest. So now, when he puts his squeeze in, his choke is at its best. Okay? Most of the chokes follow the same the same ideology, same philosophy. When I go for my choke from here, and I've got a hold of him, okay, and I can wrap him up. This is going to be about the maximum pressure I'm going to get on his body, okay? So right now, I've just put my foot inside, wrapping up so he can't make it to that side of my body. And then through here, I'm not trying to pull his head off his shoulders. I'm crunching his head like it's going to touch my hips. And then I'm taking my hand and I'm almost rolling it into his throat. I'm not, what a lot of people are going to do is they're going to come in, they're going to latch on, and when they fall to their side, they're going to extend their hips, and they're literally going to try to pull your partner's head right off your shoulders. Okay? And watch what's going to happen. If you have a relatively strong neck, the head just comes right up outside of the armpit. So what we do is, when we get in position, and I lock him up, okay, is we do an oblique crunch, pushing down here, and then roll your wrists up into his neck, okay? And then once that happens, then I can give a little bit of an arc. But when I do, I'm still doing my oblique crunch the entire time, okay? I'm gonna do the first one the way that most people are gonna do it, okay? And watch what happens. This is an exaggeration. I'm not just letting his head out. This is almost always what happens. So I go in, I get his neck, and as I'm going down, I'm just literally trying to pull his head, because this is the way that most people try to do it, because it feels strong, is literally to try to pull his head right off his shoulders. But what's happening through there is if he just sits down a little bit, at that moment in time, it's literally pulling against my wrist, and his head is going to slide right out my armpit. So now when I'm in, when I go down, rather than pulling back, I am going to go into my oblique crunch and then lock him up. Now I'm going to pull my wrists up into his throat and then set my crunch. Very little motion, tons of pressure. The other one, lots of motion, very little pressure, because his head literally just slides right out. So it's going to be more about the oblique crunch, pushing his forehead to my hip, and then creating this little rolling pressure. So his head should feel more like it's twisting rather than being pulled. It shouldn't feel like it's trying to be pulled off his shoulders. It should feel more like his forehead is going to his chest. Does that make sense? Okay. So, as I'm here, lock up, knee inside, crunch, go into that oblique, crunch his forehead to your hip, okay, and go up and over. Notice I'm still sitting up. Roll that wrist into his throat, and then go into just that last little oblique crunch, and the tap should happen. All right, let's go back and forth. 1, 2, 3. Guillotine. Okay, I get too excited. I mean, like a kid at Christmas, you know, you're just ripping the paper apart, and you're not even paying attention to the fact that, you know, there was like stuff maybe hidden in there and everything else. When I'm going for his neck and I'm dropping back, I'm at that moment in time, I'm all about going for the squeeze on the neck. The squeeze is actually last. The actual pressure on the neck is the last component. Because what I'm mostly guilty of is the moment I go for it, I'm already crunching on that neck. So now when I go hunting for his hips, I've actually made him already start moving. And so Matt didn't even have to defend me. I was already throwing him over my own shoulder because I'm already going for his neck and already going for the big crunch rather than just securing my position. So now by the time I go to connect, he's already traveling. Problem is, he didn't do any of it. I did all of it. Okay? I mostly found this when Christian and I were rolling, is that, you know, when I would dive in on it, okay, I wasn't trying to secure my position first. I was going for the tap. I was going for the sub. The sub The submission itself is going to be the culmination of doing all the right things at the right time, and then the submission just simply will be when everything is done. It's a succession of all the right work. But when I would go in and I would latch onto his head, and from here, rather than just going for position, I was already right here. I was already going for the big squeeze. And now I can't even connect to him because I literally threw him over my shoulder, okay, and gave him part of his escape. So when you first make your connection, I want you to get used to, I put enough pressure on his neck to make my connection so he can't get away. Okay, and this is also something I do in my rear naked chokes now too. I put enough to control him, then I go hunting with my legs. Then when I make the connection, then I go for the last squeeze. So in the beginning, I connect just so that I can get my control. Then I go for my connection. It takes a little getting used to. So when I'm in and I make my connection, okay, through here, I'm only holding on to him enough to get my crunch, to be able to get my legs in play, and then the upward pressure is going to start to, otherwise, like I said, I'm literally just throwing him over my shoulder, and if he's willing to go, okay, it makes it easy for him. So get used to, as soon as you're in, first part I want you to do is literally just get your legs to connect, and then we'll go after the head second. So again, oblique crunch, pressure, 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 and lock. Right now, he's not feeling hardly any real choking pressure on his neck. Now I'm setting it in, and then there's my final crunch. And again, I found, and this becomes the case with almost all submissions, your partner's not the one defending it. Okay? Your partner didn't have to. You went after it so aggressively that you threw them further than they wanted to be. Most of the time when people fail arm bars, your partner didn't defend it. You went after the arm bar so aggressively, you created the gap between their elbow and your hips. They didn't. Because when you spun, when you went, you fell so far away because you were so excited about actually getting the submission that you failed to secure the position. That's why the mantra, position before submission. It doesn't mean we're not trying to tap people. It doesn't mean we're just pinning them down. Right place, right time is the foundation of all success. There is no such thing as right time, wrong place. Doesn't exist. Because currently right now, we're all in the wrong place and good things are happening all around us. So we're all technically in the right time and we're all technically in the wrong place. So none of that exists. Okay? But right place, okay, now my timing can play a little early, can play a little late, can play right on, but if I'm in the right place, I have a much more chance. So in that instance, secure your position. Don't worry about the choke. Worry about them escaping. So now what we're going to do is I want you to go from your knees, not from a seated position. Go from your knees, and now we're going to throw our hips in and drop in for that guillotine. And this is where you're going to find that you're putting that upward pressure into their throat too soon. Okay? So we're going to go from our knees. So if Matt locks me up, he's got my head. Again, where does my hand go as quickly as possible? So now he's going to throw his hips in, grab his crunch, and then go for his choke. The bigger the gap we have to eat up, the more likely it is that you're going to try to yank on the neck too soon. And ultimately, that's what's going to become the failure. And that's when the head's going to pop out. And that's when ultimately you're possibly going to throw them over your shoulder. All right, let's give that a shot. 1, 2, 3.